listeners of the Bio Report, I want to tell you about a new member benefit from the California Technology Council. CTC has teamed with Reprivata to offer members 6 months of Reprivata's COT network service for free, which gives companies the power of a VPN at a fraction of the cost. A remote, flexible workforce is the new normal, but most corporate networks aren't built to accommodate work from home at scale. Reprivata's COT network offers an easily deployable, affordable, and scalable solution to securely enable remote workers and protect the corporate network. To learn more about this and other member benefits, go to californiatechnology.org/member benefits. I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Last month, Canadian regulators provided clearance for Appili Therapeutics to begin a Phase 2 study of an approved antiviral therapy as a potential preventative treatment against COVID-19 outbreaks. The study will enroll 760 participants who are in long-term care facilities in Ontario. Though others are looking at the drug as a possible treatment for COVID-19, this is the first study to consider its potential to prevent outbreaks. We spoke to Armand Balboni, CEO of Appili, about the drug, how it works, and its potential to prevent outbreaks of COVID-19 in high-risk populations. Armand, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks.
We're going to talk about Appili, its efforts to repurpose an approved antiviral as a prophylactic treatment against the COVID-19 virus in patients in long-term care facilities in Canada. For people not familiar with the company, what does Appili do?
Appili Therapeutics was started in 2015 as a company in the anti-infective space to address unmet needs in a fairly creative way. We really are in the global fight against infection broadly. And so what that means is we are agnostic to a particular technology. We don't suffer from it wasn't invented here, so we don't like it. We really look for the toughest problems in infectious disease and then go and try and find solutions. So that could be an antibacterial, an antiviral, an antifungal, or vaccines, of which we actually have all of those. So that really is a little bit of a different approach than many companies take.
And you're sponsoring the first clinical trial evaluating favipiravir for the prevention of COVID-19. What is favipiravir?
So the drug is a broad spectrum antiviral. And what that means is that it has activity and is active against a wide range of viruses. In this case, there are RNA viruses. So things like influenza, Ebola, where I first had a chance to look at this, and a couple of other agents, Lassa fever, a disease that's endemic in Africa, and of course SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. And so it is a broad spectrum antiviral. It's approved for influenza in Japan, and we noted that because of that activity, it is probably a great drug with a lot of safety data to try against COVID-19, and that's in fact what we're finding.
You actually had experience with the drug back when you were a staff officer at the U.S. Army Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. What was your experience with the drug then?
I was at USAMRIID and actually was loaned. I'm an officer. Have been an officer in the U.S. Army as both an MD and a PhD for over 17 years. And so what that means is I've worked on a number of different anti-infective programs. The U.S. Department of Defense sent me to the Food and Drug Administration in 2014 for the Ebola outbreak. And it was during that Ebola outbreak that I had the opportunity to work as part of a review team clinical reviewer in the FDA and looked at both remdesivir, a drug that's now being used by Gilead, and favipiravir. So both drugs are broad spectrum antivirals, and had an opportunity to look at how they were working against some RNA viruses, including Ebola.
You're looking at a very specific use of the drug for a very specific population. Why is that? What's the need you're hoping to address?
So favipiravir has some very unique properties, as do many of the antivirals. And so what we did, again, keeping with this theme of finding a problem and then going after a solution, what we did is we noted, as many people did, that COVID-19, which it now seems like a long time ago, but of course it was only months ago. Things are moving at rapid speed. But it was very clear to many of us early on that it was primarily affecting those that were elderly. In fact, in Canada, 80% of the morbidity and mortality, the death and the medical effects were noted in the elderly in long-term care. And so what we said is, because of some of the properties of the drug, it's an oral tablet versus remdesivir, which is an intravenous drug or an injected drug, which means that you can't give an intravenous drug in the long-term care setting that effectively sends them to the hospital for treatment. And so we said, well, there's some properties of favipiravir that make it uniquely situated to solve a problem with those that are most widely affected and greatly affected. And that's really what we did. We looked at the problem, we looked at the drug, and we try and match the properties of the drug to the disease. And in this case, it was in the elderly. There was lots of safety data to suggest that we could put it into those folks. Over 3,000 people have been given the drug in its development. And it's an oral dose format. It's a tablet. It's room temperature stable, which means that it's really amenable for use in the long-term care setting. So unmet need, properties of the drug, and really just matching those two things together.
How did you come to look at this, though, for COVID-19? Were you searching specifically for something to do in COVID-19? Was it something that was just opportunistic? How did it come about?
So as I kind of outlined before, I said we have a very diverse pipeline of products, and I feel very passionately, as does everybody in the company, about going after unmet need. In that case, in many cases, that those are diseases that nobody else is really going after. And so we were interested in fungal diseases. It's an area where new drugs are desperately needed. And from my work in the military, I knew that cryptococcal meningitis, a type of invasive fungal infection, was particularly deadly. And not a lot of people were going after it because most of the cases occur in the developing world. And so we were looking at that program specifically for a drug for antifungal, and a company called Fujifilm Toyama Chemical in Japan happened to have a novel antifungal drug. And so last year we had been discussing with them in acquiring that program, which we did, to go after cryptococcal meningitis. And lo and behold, they also had favipiravir, which I'd worked with before. And so we were actually looking at favipiravir for a different indication, Lassa fever, another tropical disease that's with an unmet need. And of course, in January, when things flipped to COVID-19, we knew it had some effect. And so I'd like to say it's because we're really smart, but I think we're smart and lucky. And so we were working with Fujifilm Toyama Chemical on the novel antifungal, and then it turns out that relationship broadened to include favipiravir, and now we are the partner with them in this long-term care setting. The only company, by the way, that's doing.
What is the mechanism of action, and is there something about it that's specific to COVID-19, or is it just a broad-acting antiviral?
So interestingly, these broad spectrum antivirals have activity against a number of viruses, but they have a very conserved target. And so what that really means is that in this case, it's an RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. So what that is a protein that allows the virus to multiply, to replicate, to transcribe its genetic material. And these RNA-dependent RNA polymerases are not found in humans, and they're really highly conserved evolutionarily. And so what that means is that you tend not to get resistance by this mechanism. And so it's a very well studied target. Remdesivir, by the way, also goes after RDRP, the RNA dependent RNA polymerase. So for all of those reasons, it's an intriguing area with lots of very well developed science that allows us to understand the mechanism of action.
In May, you applied to Health Canada for approval to begin a phase 2 clinical trial. How will the study work, and how big a trial will it be? What are the endpoints?
Yeah, so based on submitting to Health Canada for our approval in long-term care, we leveraged some clinical trial designs that have been used previously. And I think it's important to understand that this is a prophylaxis study, post-exposure prophylaxis, and what that means is that it's a placebo-controlled trial in 16 long-term care settings that basically allows us to evaluate whether favipiravir, when given soon after an outbreak, can help stop the outbreak or prevent those residents from going to the hospital. So the primary endpoint is control of the outbreak. And that's defined as no new COVID-19 cases in residents of the long-term care setting. The secondary objectives, of course, always include safety, but we're really looking also at rates of infection, disease progression, and fatality rates. And why that's so important is because this is where these long-term care settings are where these folks live. The residents actually live there, and so when they get COVID-19, one of the problems is that the hospitalization rate and the fatality rate is quite high, and they're taken out of their home and sent to the hospital. And this is a really dangerous situation for these folks. And so really what we're trying to do is prevent that from happening. And we can do that with tablets and do it in the place that they live. And so it really is it's a two-pronged goal. The primary objective is to stop the outbreak, and the secondary objective is to stop them from going to the hospital.
I imagine this is a challenging population in that you've got probably many comorbidities. You've got people that are on other medications simultaneously. Mm-hmm. This is a drug that's been well studied. What's known about the safety profile to date, and is that a concern given the population?
So certainly safety is always a concern with any clinical trial, and you always are studying safety. And so the interesting part of this drug is that there's a very large safety database showing that the drug is well tolerated in humans. More than 3,000 subjects have received this product. So that is from a regulatory standpoint, that's really the kind of number that you want to start to see in your safety database to understand what's happening. Importantly, Fujifilm Toyama did a great job looking at some of those comorbidities that you talked about, things like renal failure and liver failure in older folks, and looked for drug-drug interactions. And they didn't note any. What they noted is that because this drug is metabolized by enzymes in the liver, that you don't want to give this drug to folks with cirrhosis or liver failure, or at least you watch them very carefully. So I think that's certainly one concern and something we've looked at in our trial as a reason not to enroll somebody. And then the other thing about this drug is that there were in animal studies there was some noted teratogenicity, meaning that it had some fetal effects. And so they haven't seen that in people, but it certainly is a reason not to give it to pregnant women or very young children. And so that's something to think about as well. That was another reason that we designed the trial the way we did. We believe that certainly in the long-term care setting with older adults, you're less likely to see those teratogenicity effects, and they're certainly not having children either. So for all of those reasons, we think it's a good fit. Large safety database and well understood adverse events from the clinical trials that have been run for the indication that it's approved for already.
What's been the regulatory attitude in Canada towards COVID-19 related treatments? Are there efforts to accelerate these?
So I've been involved in my career with the Department of Defense and for the most part, in about 110 clinical trials around the world. Everything from HIV vaccine to dengue fever vaccine, small molecules, some blood products, really the whole gamut of programs and products. I have to say, I have never before seen a regulatory agency work as closely with us as Health Canada did for this submission, review, and subsequent no objection letter or approval for us to move forward. It has been a true public-private partnership to move this forward. And the one thing that I heard from the regulators is safety, safety, safety. And so, that's always a concern of a regulator, but in this case, they really took that to heart and tried as best they could to give us guidance, review for safety, and then, of course, we have the job of now proving that it's efficacious or it works. But fantastic interaction. Can't say enough positive things about what that's been like. My experience also from colleagues at other companies running other trials is that the US FDA is similarly treating COVID-19 therapeutics as is Health Canada. They really are trying to move the ball forward as quickly as possible within the limits of safety.
What's the intellectual property landscape around favipiravir? This is a Fujifilm Toyota chemical drug, and it's providing you the drug for free, but this is a drug that's now off patent, and others are testing generic versions for potential therapeutic potential against COVID-19.
Yeah, so there are the composition of matter patent, meaning that kind of the base molecule patent is certainly expired. And so that is generic. And as you correctly stated, there are other companies looking at generics in different jurisdictions. There are some other intellectual property that Fujifilm holds around manufacturing and the specific tablets that they use and the doses. So there is some intellectual property still associated with it, but I think with generics like this, where the molecular entity is no longer protected, in most jurisdictions you end up relying on regulatory exclusivity. And so what that means for Canada is that the sponsor of a drug, a new chemical entity that's never been approved in that jurisdiction before, which is what favipiravir is, gains what's called data protection, and there's 8 years of data protection, which means that no generic manufacturer can come in and leverage the clinical trials that we're doing now to introduce a generic into Canada. And that certainly is no guarantee that somebody won't do it, but it certainly it disincentivizes the generic players from coming in, because they've now lost the ability to really submit a similar product without having done all the work themselves. And so I think, yeah.
What's the timing for the trial, and if successful, might this have broader use as a preventative treatment for COVID-19? And are you looking beyond Canada?
So we're looking beyond Canada. We expect to enroll the first residents in the next 2 to 3 weeks from long-term care settings. We're working with a fantastic team at Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto, and a number of other groups in the Greater Toronto area that have experience with these long-term care centers. They ran, by the way, the Tamiflu studies in long-term care, and so they have a lot of experience running these kinds of prophylaxis trials in this population. And so we are thrilled to be working with them, and that's going to happen very quickly. As far as looking outside of Canada, we are continuing to have discussions with other partners, Fujifilm, and certainly other groups that want to run trials, especially in the long-term care setting. We've built up some expertise in that area, and certainly what you want to do is try and get to locations where the virus has not yet declined. And so the Northeast in the US is probably not going to have great enrollment. But if you were in Orange County, Los Angeles, for example, right now, or Chicago, you'd be seeing an increasing patient census. And so we're continuing to work with our partners to identify regions and areas where we can further the work that we've started here in Canada. And we're also talking about some other treatment trials based on some of the information that's coming back. This is a very rapidly evolving area with lots of clinical data coming. So we like to think of this as part of a global strategy to run the randomized controlled trials necessary to demonstrate whether favipiravir will in fact work, and try to stay away from some of the problems that folks have seen with hydroxychloroquine, for example, where they small studies that were not powered to actually answer a question.
Armand Balboni, CEO of Appili Therapeutics. Armand, thanks so much for your time today.
Well, thanks so much for listening, and great questions. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.